Marcus wiped the sweat from his forehead as he walked through his cornfield, checking the irrigation lines one last time before sunset. The Nebraska farm had been in his family for 3 generations, and despite the constant struggles with weather, pests, and market prices, he couldn't imagine doing anything else. The golden stalk swayed gently in the evening breeze, creating a rustling symphony that always brought him peace. Something crashed through the corn rows behind him. Marcus spun around, expecting to see a deer, or maybe his neighbor's escaped cattle. Instead, he found himself staring at the most bizarre creature he'd ever encountered. It was roughly the size of a large dog but built like a lizard, with iridescent scales that shifted between deep purple and emerald green. Its elongated snout was filled with sharp teeth, and its eyes were enormous, taking up nearly a third of its reptilian head. Those eyes now looked at him with what could only be described as desperate fear. The creature was clearly pregnant, its swollen belly dragging along the ground as it tried to crawl deeper into the corn. Dark fluid seeped from several wounds along its flanks, and its breathing came in short, panicked gasps. Marcus had seen enough injured animals on the farm to recognize when something was dying. His first instinct was to run. This thing clearly wasn't from Earth, and every science fiction movie he'd ever watched suggested that meeting aliens rarely ended well for humans. But as the creature tried to move away from him, it collapsed, too weak to continue. Its massive eyes fixed on his face, and Marcus saw something there that transcended species. A mother's desperate need to protect her unborn young. "Easy there," Marcus said softly, the same tone he used with spooked horses. "I'm not going to hurt you." The alien's head tilted slightly as if trying to understand his words. Marcus slowly knelt down, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. Up close, he could see that the creature's scales were actually quite beautiful, catching the last rays of sunlight like scattered jewels. The wounds looked like they came from some kind of energy weapon, the edges cauterized and blackened. Marcus had always been the type to help injured animals, whether they were his livestock or wild creatures that wandered onto his property. His late wife Sarah had often teased him about being a soft touch for anything that needed help. Looking at this alien mother, wounded and afraid, he knew she would have expected him to do the right thing. "You're hungry, aren't you?" he asked, noticing how the creature's ribs showed through her scales. "And scared. I get that." Moving slowly, Marcus pulled his lunch from his jacket pocket. He'd been saving the roast beef sandwich for later, but this seemed more important. He tore off a piece of meat and held it out, keeping his hand steady despite his racing heart. The alien sniffed cautiously, her tongue flicking out to taste the air. After a long moment, she stretched her neck forward and delicately took the meat from his palm. She chewed slowly, as if savoring every bite, then looked at him hopefully. Marcus smiled and offered her another piece. "That's it. You're safe now." As the creature ate, Marcus noticed something odd. The wounds along her side seemed to be healing, the burned edges slowly knitting together. Her scales grew brighter, and her breathing became less labored. Whatever she was, food was helping her recover at an incredible rate. By the time Marcus had fed her his entire sandwich, plus an apple and a bag of crackers from his truck, the alien looked remarkably better. She was still obviously pregnant and exhausted, but the desperate fear had left her eyes. Instead, she watched him with what looked like gratitude. "I should get you some proper food," Marcus said, standing up and brushing dirt from his knees. "And water. You must be thirsty." The creature made a soft chirping sound that might have been agreement. Marcus walked back to his farmhouse, glancing over his shoulder to make sure she was following. She moved carefully but steadily, her tail leaving a distinct track in the soft earth. Marcus's dog Rex came bounding around the corner of the house, ready to bark at the intruder, but stopped short when he saw the alien. Instead of aggression, Rex showed the same gentle curiosity he displayed around new calves. He sniffed the air, wagged his tail once, and settled down on the porch as if an alien visitor was the most natural thing in the world. In the barn, Marcus set up a comfortable area with fresh straw and brought out his emergency medical supplies. He'd learned basic veterinary care from necessity, living so far from the nearest animal doctor. The alien allowed him to clean her wounds with antiseptic, barely flinching even though it must have stung. "You're tougher than you look," Marcus commented as he worked, but then again, You'd have to be to survive whatever did this to you." As if in response, the creature looked up at the darkening sky with obvious nervousness. Marcus followed her gaze but saw only the first stars appearing in the twilight. Still, her anxiety was contagious. Something had hurt her badly, and that something might still be out there. Marcus brought her water in a large bowl and more food from his kitchen, leftovers from dinner, and some raw vegetables from his garden. She ate eagerly but carefully, as if she'd learned not to waste any opportunity for nourishment. Between bites, she would pause and look at him with those enormous eyes, and Marcus felt an odd connection forming. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need," he told her as he settled down on a hay bale nearby. "This farm has always been a place where the lost and hurt can find shelter." The alien curled up in the straw, her tail wrapped protectively around her swollen belly. As she drifted off to sleep, she kept one eye on Marcus, and he realized she trusted him enough to rest in his presence. It was a responsibility he didn't take lightly. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the barn doors. Marcus pulled his jacket tighter and wondered what tomorrow would bring. He'd helped countless animals over the years, but something told him this was different. This was the beginning of something that would change everything. Marcus woke before dawn to the sound of distressed chirping coming from the barn. He grabbed his boots and rushed outside, finding the alien female pacing restlessly in her straw bed. Her scales had shifted to a deeper, more intense color, and she was breathing heavily. "Easy, girl," Marcus said softly, approaching slowly. "What's wrong?" The creature looked at him with wide, pain-filled eyes, then let out a low, keening sound that made his heart clench. Marcus had been around enough farm animals to recognize the signs. She was going into labor. He quickly gathered clean towels, warm water, and his veterinary supplies, though he had no idea if any of it would be useful for an alien birth. The female had curled herself into a tight circle, her breathing becoming more rapid and shallow. Marcus knelt beside her, offering what comfort he could with gentle words and a steady presence. The labor lasted through the morning. Marcus stayed with her the entire time, occasionally offering water or stroking her neck when the pain seemed overwhelming. She gripped his hand with surprising gentleness during the worst contractions, her claws careful not to break his skin. When the first egg emerged, Marcus was amazed by its beauty. It was about the size of a football, with a shell that seemed to be made of crystalline material that caught and refracted light into rainbow patterns. The female immediately began cleaning it with her tongue, crooning softly. 2 more eggs followed over the next hour, each one as beautiful as the first. The alien mother arranged them carefully in the straw, then looked at Marcus with exhausted but grateful eyes. She made a series of soft clicking sounds, and somehow Marcus understood she was thanking him. "You did all the hard work," Marcus said, wiping sweat from his own forehead. "I just kept you company." The female's attention turned completely to her eggs, which had begun to emit a faint, warm glow. Marcus brought fresh food and water, marveling at how natural it felt to care for this alien family. Rex had stationed himself as a guard dog outside the barn, as if he understood the importance of protecting the new arrivals. As the day progressed, Marcus went about his usual farm chores, but he found himself checking on his guests frequently. The alien mother rarely left her eggs, eating only when Marcus brought food directly to her. She seemed to be listening for something, her head often tilted toward the sky with an expression of intense concentration. That afternoon, while Marcus was repairing a fence in the far pasture, he heard a sound that made his blood run cold. It started as a low humming that seemed to come from everywhere at once, growing steadily louder until it became a roar that shook the ground beneath his feet. Marcus looked up to see something that belonged in a science fiction movie, not above his quiet Nebraska farm. The ship was enormous, easily the size of a city block, with a hull that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. It moved with impossible grace for something so large, casting a shadow that plunged half his farm into artificial twilight. He ran toward the barn, his heart pounding. The alien mother was standing now, her scales bright with agitation, making urgent chirping sounds. The eggs were pulsing faster, their glow intensifying with each throb. The massive ship settled into his largest field, crushing his prize-winning corn beneath landing struts that looked like metallic trees. As Marcus watched in fascination and terror, a section of the hull opened like a flower and figures began emerging. They were similar to his barn guest, but larger and more imposing. Their scales were darker, shifting between black and deep red, and they moved with predatory grace. They wore what looked like armor made from the same crystalline material as the eggs, and they carried weapons that hummed with barely contained energy. Marcus positioned himself between the barn and the approaching aliens, his hands raised to show he was unarmed but not surrendering. His mouth was dry as sand, but his voice was steady when he called out, "She's safe. She and her babies are safe." The lead alien stopped about 20 feet away, its massive head tilting as it studied Marcus. It was at least 8 feet tall, with scars across its snout that spoke of many battles. When it spoke, the words came out as a series of clicks and hisses that Marcus couldn't understand, but the tone was clearly demanding. From the barn came answering calls, and Marcus heard the rustle of straw as his guest moved toward the entrance. She appeared in the doorway, moving slowly but with dignity, her 3 eggs carefully cradled against her body. The large alien's demeanor changed instantly. The weapon in its hands powered down, and it dropped to one knee, making soft, reverent sounds. The other aliens followed suit, and Marcus realized he was witnessing something sacred. The female approached the group, chirping softly. The lead alien reached out with surprising gentleness to examine the eggs, its scarred face showing what Marcus could only interpret as wonder. They had a long conversation in their clicking language, with the female gesturing frequently toward Marcus. Finally, the large alien turned to study Marcus again, but this time there was no hostility in its gaze. It approached slowly, stopping just outside arm's reach. When it spoke, Marcus was startled to hear broken but recognizable English. "You helped her?" Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice. The alien's huge eyes studied his face intently, as if trying to read his soul. Why? It was such a simple question, but Marcus found himself thinking of Sarah, of the countless animals he'd helped over the years, of the values his grandfather had taught him about being a good neighbor to all living things. Because she needed help, Marcus said simply, and because it was the right thing to do. The alien was silent for a long moment, then made a sound that might have been surprise or approval. It turned and spoke rapidly to the other aliens in their own language. Several of them approached the ship and returned with what looked like medical equipment, immediately beginning to examine the female and her eggs with obvious expertise and care. The lead alien turned back to Marcus. "She says, you stayed with her, fed her, protected her young." "Anyone would have done the same thing," Marcus replied, though he wasn't entirely sure that was true. The alien's expression suggested it didn't think so either. "No, not anyone. You risked much for stranger. For enemy species." "Enemy?" Marcus frowned. "You're not my enemy. You're just someone who needed help." The alien stared at him for so long that Marcus began to worry he'd said something wrong. Then it placed one clawed hand over its heart in what seemed like a formal gesture. "I am Kethvar, war commander of the Saurian fleet. The female you protected is my daughter, Ziramel. She fled here when our enemies attacked her transport." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. This wasn't just any alien he'd helped. He'd protected the daughter of what sounded like a military leader. "The ones who hurt her?" Marcus asked carefully. "Are they still out there?" Kethavar's expression darkened, his scales shifting to an almost black hue. "Yes, the Devourers hunt us across many systems. They seek to consume all life, all resources. My daughter's escape pod was damaged in battle. We feared her lost." Marcus glanced toward the barn where Ziramel was being tended by the alien medics. "Well, she's not lost anymore. She's safe, and so are her babies. Because of you," Kethavar said, his voice carrying a weight that made Marcus uncomfortable. "Human Marcus Thompson, you have done something remarkable. In our culture, protecting another's offspring creates a blood debt that cannot be easily repaid." "I don't want payment," Marcus said quickly. "I just wanted to help." Kethavar tilted his massive head. "This is why it is remarkable. You helped expecting nothing. Most species we encounter demand immediate rewards for even small services." One of the medics approached and spoke rapidly in the clicking language. Kethavar's posture relaxed slightly and he turned back to Marcus. "Ziramel and the young ones are healthy. The eggs will hatch within days. She wishes to speak with you." Marcus followed the war commander to the barn where he found Ziramel looking much healthier than she had the night before. Her scales had returned to their beautiful purple-green shimmer, and her eyes were bright with intelligence. The 3 eggs were nestled in a portable incubation unit that the medics had brought from their ship. When she saw Marcus, Ziramel made a series of soft chirping sounds. Kethvar translated, "She says you smell like kindness and safety. She wants to know if you have offspring of your own." Marcus felt a familiar ache in his chest. "My wife and I tried for children, but it never happened. She passed away 2 years ago." Kethvar translated, and Ziramel's expression became deeply sad. She reached out with one clawed hand and gently touched Marcus's arm, making comforting sounds. "She says she is sorry for your loss," Kethvar said. "She also says she understands why you helped her. Those who have known the pain of childlessness understand the preciousness of new life." Before Marcus could respond, an urgent alarm began sounding from the alien ship. Kethvar's head snapped up and he barked rapid orders in his own language. The medics immediately began gathering their equipment. "What's wrong?" Marcus asked. "Devourer ships, 3 of them, approaching this system. We must leave immediately." Kethvar's scales were now shifting between red and black, and what Marcus was learning meant extreme agitation. "They tracked us here. This world is no longer safe." "What do you mean, not safe?" Marcus felt a cold dread settling in his stomach. Kethvar met his eyes grimly. "The Devourers consume everything. Planets, people, entire civilizations. If they find populated worlds, they strip them bare. Every living thing becomes fuel for their expansion." Marcus stared at the war commander in horror. "You're saying they'll destroy Earth?" "If they discover it has life, yes. They will harvest every human, every animal, every plant. Nothing will remain but a dead rock floating in space." The weight of this revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. His quiet farm, his neighbors, his entire world was in danger because he'd helped an injured alien. But looking at Ziramel, now carefully moving her precious eggs toward the ship, he knew he couldn't regret his choice. "Can you stop them?" Marcus asked. Kethvar's expression was grim. "We will try, but they outnumber us and their ships are powerful. My fleet was already damaged from previous battles." "Then stay and fight here," Marcus said impulsively. "Use my farm as a base. You know the terrain now and you'll be protecting what matters to you." The war commander stared at him in surprise. "You would risk your world's discovery? Risk bringing war to your peaceful farm?" Marcus thought of Sarah, of the values she'd believed in, of the choice between doing what was safe and doing what was right. "If these devourers find Earth anyway, at least this way we have a chance. And if you win, maybe they'll never find us at all." Kethvar translated for Ziramel, who immediately began making urgent chirping sounds. Her father listened, then turned back to Marcus with an expression that might have been amazement. "My daughter says you are either the bravest human alive or the most foolish. She is not certain which." Kethvar paused, studying Marcus's face. "I begin to think it may be both." The alarm from the ship grew more insistent. Kethvar spoke rapidly into a communication device on his wrist, then looked at Marcus with decision in his eyes. "Very well, human Marcus Thompson. We accept your offer, but you must understand what this means. When the Devourers arrive, this will become a battlefield. Your peaceful farm will see violence and destruction." Marcus nodded, his throat tight. "I understand. But it's still the right thing to do." Kethvar made that sound that might have been approval again. "You continue to surprise me, human." "Very well. We will prepare defenses. But first you must take shelter. What we are about to face is beyond anything your species has encountered." "No," Marcus said firmly. "This is my land, my home. I'm not hiding while you fight for it." "You have no weapons that can harm Devourer ships," Kethvar pointed out reasonably. "Maybe not," Marcus admitted. "But I know this land better than anyone. Every hill, every creek, every cave and hiding spot. That has to be worth something in a battle." For the first time since they'd met, Kethvar made a sound that Marcus realized was laughter. "You wish to be our guide? Our tactical advisor?" "I wish to help however I can," Marcus said simply. Ziramel had been listening to their conversation, and now she spoke urgently to her father. Kethvar's expression became very serious as he listened. Then he turned to Marcus with something like awe in his eyes. "My daughter says she felt the Devourer's hunger when they attacked her ship. She says it was like staring into an endless void that wanted to swallow everything. But when she looks at you, she sees the opposite. She sees someone who creates and protects instead of consuming and destroying." Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks. "I'm just a farmer." "No," Kethvar said with certainty. "You are something far more important. You are hope." And that may be exactly what we need to win this fight. The alarm changed tone, becoming more urgent. Kethavar began issuing rapid orders to his crew, who immediately started unloading equipment from the ship. Marcus watched in fascination as they set up what looked like energy shields around the barn and farmhouse. "They'll be here within the hour," Kethavar told him. "Are you ready for this, human Marcus Thompson?" Marcus looked around at his farm, at the home he'd built with Sarah, at the land that had been in his family for generations. Then he looked at Ziramel, carefully tending her eggs while alien warriors prepared for battle around her. "Ready as I'll ever be," he said, and meant it. The Devourer ships arrived like harbingers of nightmare. Marcus watched through the reinforced windows of his farmhouse as 3 massive vessels descended from the darkening sky. Their hulls a sickly yellow-green color that seemed to pulse with malevolent life. Unlike Kethavar's ship, which had landed with grace and precision, these craft seemed to tear holes in the air itself as they approached. "They are biomechanical," Kethavar explained, his voice tight with controlled fear. "Living ships grown rather than built. They feel hunger the way you or I feel thirst." Marcus could see what he meant. The ships writhed slightly as they moved, their surfaces rippling like skin. Appendages that might have been weapons or feeding tubes extended from their undersides, tasting the air as they searched for prey. "How do we fight something like that?" Marcus asked, trying to keep the tremor out of his voice. "Carefully," Kethavar replied, "and with tactics they do not expect." The alien commander had positioned his forces with surprising cunning around Marcus's property. Warriors were hidden in the cornfields, their natural camouflage making them nearly invisible among the stalks. Heavy weapons had been set up in the barn and farmhouse, taking advantage of the solid earth construction. Most clever of all, they had hidden their main ship in the old quarry behind Marcus's property, using the natural rock formations to mask its energy signature. Marcus found himself pressed into service as more than just a guide. His intimate knowledge of the local terrain had proven invaluable in setting up ambush positions and escape routes. He'd suggested using the irrigation ditches as covered approaches, the grain silos as elevated firing positions, and the old storm cellar as a command bunker. "Your tactical mind impresses me," Kethavar had told him while they planned the defense. "Are all farmers on your world such natural strategists?" "We have to be," Marcus had replied. "Nature's always trying to destroy your crops, whether it's weather, pests, or disease. You learn to think 3 steps ahead." Now, as the Devourer ships began their descent, Marcus crouched beside Kethavar in the storm cellar that had been hastily converted into a command center. Alien technology mixed with human practicality as monitoring equipment shared space with Sarah's old canning supplies. The first Devourer ship landed in what had been Marcus's prize cornfield, crushing the stalks beneath organic landing pods that immediately began burrowing into the soil. The ship seemed to sigh with satisfaction as its feeding tubes extended deep into the earth, beginning to drain nutrients from the land itself. "They're eating my soil," Marcus said in horror, watching his fertile farmland turn gray and lifeless around the alien vessel. "They consume everything," Kethavar confirmed grimly. "Minerals, organic matter, even the basic elements that make life possible. In time, they would strip this entire planet down to bedrock." The other 2 ships landed in similar fashion, forming a triangle with Marcus's farmhouse at the center. As they settled, the hulls began to split open like flowering buds, revealing the horror within. The Devourers themselves were nothing like the noble Saurians. They moved like insects but were the size of bears, with too many joints in their limbs and mandibles that dripped with acidic saliva. Their eyes were compound things that reflected light in sickening rainbow patterns, and they chittered constantly as they emerged from their ships. "Wait for my signal," Kethavar whispered into his communication device. "Let them commit to their positions." Marcus watched through the periscope they'd rigged as dozens of Devourers spread out across his property, their movements efficient and predatory. They carried weapons that looked like they had been grown rather than manufactured, organic rifles that pulsed with bioluminescent veins. Then, Marcus saw something that made his blood run cold. A group of Devourers was heading directly for the barn where Ziramel and her eggs were hidden. "They're going for the barn," he whispered urgently. Kethavar's scales shifted to combat colors. "They smell the eggs. To them, developing young represent the richest possible meal." "Over my dead body," Marcus growled, reaching for the alien weapon Kethavar had given him. Wait, the war commander said, placing a restraining hand on Marcus's arm. Trust the plan. The devourers approached the barn cautiously, their insect-like heads swiveling as they searched for threats. They were almost at the entrance when Marcus's modified irrigation system activated, but instead of water, the hidden nozzles sprayed a mixture of liquid nitrogen and chemical fertilizer that Cathvar's engineers had jury-rigged as a weapon. The effect was devastating. The supercooled spray flash-froze the devourer's chitinous armor, making it brittle. As they staggered in confusion, Saurian warriors erupted from concealment in the corn rows, their energy weapons cutting down the frozen enemies with surgical precision. Now, Cathvar roared. The battle exploded across Marcus's farm with terrifying violence. Energy beams crisscrossed the evening air like deadly lightning as Saurian warriors engaged the devourer forces. Marcus found himself firing his borrowed weapon at targets that moved too fast for human reflexes. Guided by Cathvar's shouted directions, the devourers were vicious fighters, but they seemed confused by the tactics being used against them. They were accustomed to overwhelming primitive defenders through sheer numbers and firepower. They weren't prepared for an enemy that knew the terrain intimately and used human ingenuity to turn everyday farm equipment into weapons. Marcus watched in amazement as his grain auger, modified with Saurian technology, became a particle beam cannon that carved through devourer ranks. His old tractor, equipped with alien shields and weapons, became a mobile fortress that his neighbors would never have recognized. But the devourers adapted quickly. Their ships began launching aerial drones that swooped through the air like mechanical vultures, forcing the Saurian warriors to take cover. The tide of battle shifted as the invaders pressed their numerical advantage. "We're being overwhelmed," Cathvar admitted, his voice tight with strain. "They have too many drones." Marcus watched the aerial attackers diving at their positions and felt a spark of inspiration. "What if we brought them down to our level?" Before Cathvar could ask what he meant, Marcus was moving. He sprinted from the storm cellar to his farmhouse, dodging energy blasts that scorched the earth around his feet. In his garage, he grabbed something he'd used countless times, but never in combat. His old shotgun and a box of shells he used for scaring crows. But these weren't ordinary shells. Years ago, he'd experimented with loading his own ammunition for pest control, creating shells filled with metallic chaff that could confuse birds' navigation. Now, as devourer drones swooped toward him, Marcus put that experience to deadly use. The first drone dove at him with mandibles extended, its compound eyes gleaming with predatory hunger. Marcus waited until it was almost on top of him, then fired. The chaff-loaded shell exploded in a cloud of metallic particles that short-circuited the drone's biomechanical systems. It crashed into his chicken coop in a shower of sparks and alien fluids. "Cathvar," Marcus shouted into his communicator. "The drone's electronics are vulnerable to metallic interference. Tell your people to target their sensor arrays." The war commander's response was immediate and effective. Saurian weapons began focusing on the drone's sensory organs rather than their armored bodies. Within minutes, the sky was raining disabled aircraft as the devourers lost their aerial advantage. But victory was short-lived. The three bioships were beginning to pulse with increasing brightness, their feeding tubes withdrawing from the soil as they prepared for something that made Cathvar curse in his own language. "They're preparing to spore," he said urgently. "If those ships release their reproductive spores into your atmosphere, they will seed this entire continent with devourer hatchlings. Your world will be lost within a year." Marcus felt ice form in his veins as he realized what that meant. Every person he'd ever known, every place he'd ever been, every living thing on Earth would become food for an endless swarm of hungry monsters. "How long do we have?" he asked. "Minutes at most," Cathvar replied. "We must destroy those ships before they can release the spores." Marcus looked at the massive biovessels, their pulsing hulls now glowing like malevolent suns. His farm was about to become ground zero for either humanity's salvation or its destruction. Marcus stared at the pulsing bioships and felt something click into place in his mind. Years of farming had taught him that sometimes the most effective solutions were also the simplest ones. While Cathvar coordinated desperate attacks against the heavily armored vessels, Marcus was remembering something his grandfather had taught him about dealing with infestations. "Sometimes you don't fight the pest directly," the old man had said. "Sometimes you change the environment to make it hostile to them." "Cathvar," Marcus called urgently. "Those ships are biological, right? Living organisms?" Yes, but their armor is too thick for our weapons to penetrate before they complete the sporing process, the war commander replied, frustration evident in his voice. What if we don't try to penetrate the armor? Marcus asked. What if we poison them instead? Kethvar's massive head turned toward him. Explain. Marcus pointed toward his equipment shed. I've got tanks of anhydrous ammonia for fertilizing. It's toxic as hell to most organisms, especially in high concentrations. What if we could get it into their breathing systems? The ships filter the air they process, Kethvar said, but his tone suggested growing interest. But if we could overwhelm their filtration systems? My irrigation network, Marcus said, his excitement building. It covers the entire farm. If we could modify the pumps to spray ammonia instead of water, create a toxic cloud dense enough. Kethvar's scarred features twisted into what Marcus had learned was a saurian battle grin. It might work, but someone would have to manually activate the system and remain to adjust the flow rates. The person operating it would be exposed to lethal concentrations. Marcus was already moving toward the shed. Then it's a good thing I know exactly how much my crops can take before they die. I've been walking these fields my whole life. I can judge the wind patterns and dispersal rates better than any computer. Marcus, no. Kethvar called after him. The exposure will kill you. Maybe, Marcus called back, already pulling on his chemical application gear. But if I don't try, everyone dies anyway. The Saurian warriors provided covering fire as Marcus sprinted across his yard to the irrigation control station. Devourer ground forces were closing in from 3 directions, their chittering growing louder as they sensed victory. Energy blasts seared the air around Marcus, one close enough that he felt his hair singe. At the control station, Marcus's hands flew over familiar switches and valves. He'd performed these operations thousands of times, but never under combat conditions, and never with his wife's old gas mask fogging up from his rapid breathing. The anhydrous ammonia tanks were full, thank God, and the wind was coming from the southwest, just like it had for the past 3 days. Kethvar, I need you to drive them toward the center of the field, Marcus called into his communicator. Get those ships directly over the main irrigation hub. Understood. All units execute harassment pattern 7. Drive the enemy toward the farmhouse. Marcus watched through his mask as Saurian warriors emerged from cover just long enough to fire at the devourers, then disappeared again. The insect-like aliens took the bait, advancing aggressively toward what they perceived as a retreating enemy. More importantly, their bioships began drifting toward the center of the farm to provide better fire support for their ground forces. The ships were almost in position when Marcus realized he had a problem. The standard irrigation nozzles wouldn't create the dense, concentrated cloud he needed. He required something with more pressure, more volume. His eyes fell on the old crop duster attachment he'd removed from his tractor that morning. It was designed to spray large areas with fine mists of chemicals. If he could connect it to the ammonia tanks. Working with desperate speed, Marcus began connecting hoses and adapting fittings. His hands shook from adrenaline, making the work harder. But muscle memory guided him through the familiar process of rigging field equipment. Behind him, the sounds of battle grew closer as the devourers pushed toward his position. Marcus, Kethvar's voice crackled with static and urgency. The ships are beginning their final sporing sequence. You have less than 2 minutes. Marcus spun the last connection tight and grabbed the manual controls for the crop duster. The bioships were directly overhead now, their pulsing intensifying as internal pressure built toward the explosive release of countless spores. Here goes nothing, Marcus muttered, and activated the system. The effect was immediate and spectacular. Instead of water, a dense white cloud of anhydrous ammonia erupted from dozens of nozzles across the farm. The chemical fog rose rapidly in the evening air, creating an artificial weather system that enveloped the bioships like a toxic embrace. The ship's reaction was immediate and violent. Their smooth flight became erratic as their organic systems tried to process the poisonous atmosphere. Hull plates began shifting colors from sickly yellow-green to an alarming purple-black. Most telling of all, the pulsing that indicated spore preparation became irregular and weak. But Marcus had underestimated the concentration needed. Even with his gas mask and protective gear, the ammonia cloud was overwhelming his defenses. His eyes streamed tears that he couldn't wipe away, and his lungs burned with each breath. Worse, he could feel the chemicals seeping through his clothing, burning his skin. The ships are dropping, Kethvar reported. But they're not dead yet. Can you increase the concentration? Marcus looked at the control panel through vision that was becoming increasingly blurry. He could boost the pressure and increase the flow rate, but doing so would create a cloud so toxic that it would kill him within minutes. Behind him he could hear Devourer ground forces getting closer, their chittering taking on an excited tone as they sensed wounded prey. He thought of Sarah, of the life they'd built together on this land. He thought of Ziramel and her unborn young, depending on him for their safety. He thought of Earth itself, green and blue and beautiful, hanging vulnerable in space. Marcus reached for the pressure controls and pushed them to maximum. The cloud that erupted from the irrigation system was like nothing he'd ever created. It was so dense that it blocked out the setting sun, turning day to night across his farm. The ammonia concentration was lethal to any living thing caught within it, including himself. Above him, the bioships were dying. Their hull plates cracked and split as their organic systems shut down. One by one, they began falling from the sky like poisoned birds. The largest ship crashed into his cornfield with an impact that shook the ground, its dying cry a sound that Marcus felt in his bones rather than heard. The Devourer ground forces caught in the chemical cloud didn't fare any better. Their chittering turned to screams as their respiratory systems failed. Marcus watched through failing vision as the insect-like creatures staggered and collapsed, their bodies convulsing as the poison did its work. But Marcus was dying too. The protective gear that had seemed so adequate for normal agricultural work was useless against the concentrations he'd created. Each breath was agony and his vision was fading rapidly. He collapsed beside the control station, his hand still on the pressure valve, maintaining the lethal cloud even as it killed him. Through the fog, he saw a familiar shape approaching. Cathvar was running toward him, the Saurian's natural respiratory filters allowing him to survive briefly in the toxic environment. The war commander reached Marcus just as his strength finally gave out. "You did it," Cathvar said, his voice distorted by an emergency breathing apparatus. "The ships are down. The threat is ended." Marcus tried to speak but could only manage a whisper. "The eggs." "Ziramel, safe," Cathvar assured him. "Your sacrifice saved them all." As consciousness faded, Marcus felt strong claws lifting him from the toxic ground. The last thing he remembered was the sound of alien medical equipment activating and Cathavar's voice calling urgently for their best healers. Marcus drifted in and out of consciousness over the following days, dimly aware of alien voices speaking in hushed tones around him. When his vision finally cleared enough to focus, he found himself in what looked like a medical bay that had been set up in his own living room. Saurian technology hummed quietly around him, monitors displaying readouts in flowing alien script. "You should be dead," a voice said beside him. Marcus turned his head carefully, fighting dizziness to see Cathvar sitting in Sarah's old rocking chair. The war commander looked exhausted, his scales dulled with fatigue, but his eyes were bright with something that might have been amazement. "Honestly, I thought I was," Marcus croaked, his throat feeling like he'd swallowed broken glass. "What happened?" "Our medical technology is advanced, but even we have limits," Cathvar explained. "You absorbed enough chemical poison to kill a dozen humans. Your lungs were destroyed. Your nervous system was shutting down, and your cellular structure was breaking apart at the molecular level." Marcus tried to sit up and immediately regretted it as the room spun around him. "But I'm alive." "Because my daughter intervened," Cathvar said, and there was something like reverence in his voice. "Ziramel insisted we try an experimental procedure. She gave you some of her own life force, sharing her natural regenerative abilities. It has never been attempted between species before." That explained the strange tingling Marcus felt throughout his body, and the way his skin seemed to shimmer slightly in certain light. "Is she?" "Weak but alive. The procedure drained her considerably, but she will recover." Cathvar leaned forward in the chair. "She says you saved her children, so she saved you. In Saurian culture, this creates bonds that transcend individual species." Marcus managed to prop himself up on his elbows and look around his transformed home. The furniture had been pushed aside to make room for medical equipment, but someone had taken care to preserve Sarah's photographs and personal items. Through the window, he could see Saurian engineers working to restore his farm, using technology that seemed to be healing the land itself. "The Devourers?" he asked. "Dead. All of them. Your chemical attack was thorough." Cathvar's expression became thoughtful. We have fought the Devourers across dozens of star systems. Never have we seen them defeated so completely by such simple means. You turned your own land into a weapon against them. Marcus thought about that for a moment. It's what farmers do. We're always fighting to protect our land from things that want to destroy it. The Devourers were just another kind of pest. Kethvar made that sound that Marcus had learned was laughter. Only a human would describe a species that has consumed entire civilizations as just another kind of pest. A soft chirping from the next room drew their attention. Kethvar stood and helped Marcus to his feet, supporting him as they walked slowly toward the sound. In what had been Marcus's guest bedroom, they found Ziramel resting beside 3 crystalline incubation units that pulsed with warm, golden light. The eggs are hatching, Kethvar said with quiet pride. As they watched, hairline cracks appeared in the surface of one egg. The shell began to split with a sound like wind chimes, revealing something that made Marcus catch his breath. The baby saurian was no bigger than a kitten, its scales an iridescent silver that caught the light like precious metal. Its eyes, when they opened, were huge and curious, immediately fixing on Marcus with unmistakable intelligence. Ziramel made soft, encouraging sounds as her first child struggled free of the shell. When the tiny creature stood on unsteady legs, it immediately began exploring its surroundings with typical reptilian caution. But when it caught sight of Marcus, something remarkable happened. The baby chirped once, then began walking directly toward him with complete trust. It climbed carefully up his pajama leg and settled against his chest, purring in a way that reminded Marcus of the barn cat Sarah used to feed. Extraordinary, Kethvar breathed. Saurian young normally required days to accept the presence of anyone outside their immediate family. This one treats you as if you were its parent. Marcus gently stroked the tiny creature's scales, marveling at their softness. Maybe it recognizes me from when its mother was stressed. Animals can sense things like that. Ziramel spoke rapidly to her father, gesturing toward Marcus and the baby. Kethvar listened carefully, then turned to Marcus with an expression of deep seriousness. She says the child has bonded with you. In our culture, this is considered a sacred connection. She wishes to name the young one Marcus Tell, which roughly translates to blessed by the protector. Marcus felt his eyes fill with tears he couldn't explain. Here was a tiny alien life named in his honor, trusting him completely despite being only minutes old. It was a gift he'd never expected to receive. The other 2 eggs hatched over the next hour, each baby as perfect and trusting as the first. Soon Marcus found himself sitting in his rocking chair with 3 infant saurians draped across his lap, like living jewelry, their scales shimmering as they dozed in the warmth of his body heat. This creates complications, Kethvar said, but his tone was gentle. The young have bonded with you. Traditionally, this would make you part of our family unit. What does that mean, practically speaking? Marcus asked, carefully adjusting his position so the sleeping babies weren't disturbed. It means you now have responsibilities to our clan, and we have responsibilities to you. It means that wherever we go in the galaxy, you will always have a place among us. Kethvar paused. It also means we cannot simply leave and abandon you to face potential retaliation alone. Marcus looked up sharply. Retaliation? The Devourers were part of a larger swarm. When the other hives learn that one of their scouting forces was completely destroyed, they will investigate. Earth's location is no longer secret. The weight of this revelation settled on Marcus like a physical burden. By saving Ziramel and her children, by fighting to protect them, he had inadvertently exposed his entire world to future danger. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I never meant for any of this to happen. Kethvar looked at him with something like amazement. You apologize? Human Marcus Thompson, you have done something unprecedented. You have shown the galaxy that humans will fight to protect the innocent, even at the cost of their own lives. You have proven that Earth breeds warriors worthy of respect. I'm not a warrior, Marcus protested. I'm just a farmer who did what needed to be done. Exactly, Kethvar said with satisfaction. You are a farmer who became a warrior when circumstances demanded it. You are a protector who asked for nothing in return. You are exactly the kind of ally my people have been searching for across the stars. One of the baby saurians stirred in Marcus's lap, opening sleepy eyes to look at him with absolute trust. As he gently stroked its tiny head, Marcus realized that his quiet life was about to become much more complicated. But looking at these precious lives he'd helped protect, he found he didn't mind at all. The stars visible through his farmhouse window seemed different now. Instead of distant points of light, they were destinations, places where new friends and new dangers waited. And somewhere among them, a grateful alien civilization was preparing to welcome Earth into a larger community. Marcus smiled as he rocked gently back and forth, 3 alien babies purring contentedly in his arms. Sarah would have loved this, he thought. She always said their farm was meant to be a place where new life could flourish. 6 months later, Marcus stood in what had once been his simple cornfield and marveled at how much his world had changed. Where rows of grain had once grown in orderly lines, there was now a thriving settlement that blended human practicality with saurian elegance. His old barn had been expanded into a cultural exchange center, while his farmhouse served as the unofficial embassy for humanity's first contact with an alien civilization. The 3 baby saurians had grown remarkably quickly, now the size of large dogs and displaying personalities as distinct as any human children. Marcus's Tell, the first to hatch and still Marcus's favorite, had developed his mother's gentle nature but his grandfather's tactical mind. The other 2, whom Marcus had been allowed to name Caramel and Hope Tell in honor of his wife and his feelings about the future, were equally remarkable in their own ways. "The Council of Worlds has agreed to your proposal," Kethvar announced, joining Marcus on the porch where they often held their evening conversations. The war commander had become something between a brother-in-law and a best friend, their bond forged in battle and strengthened by shared responsibility for the young ones. "Which proposal?" Marcus asked, scratching behind Caramel's ears as the young saurian curled up beside his chair. "I've made so many suggestions over the past few months I've lost track." "The Defensive Alliance," Kethvar said, settling his now familiar bulk into the reinforced chair they'd built for him. "Earth will be granted protection in exchange for sharing human tactical innovations and serving as a neutral meeting ground for interspecies negotiations." Marcus felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he'd been carrying since learning about the larger devourer threat. "So Earth is safe?" "As safe as anywhere can be in a galaxy full of dangers," Kethvar confirmed. "But yes, the major powers have agreed that this world is too valuable to lose. Your species' unique approach to problem-solving has already revolutionized several military strategies." It was true. Human solutions to alien problems had proven surprisingly effective across numerous situations. The same agricultural creativity that had turned Marcus's irrigation system into a weapon had inspired new defensive technologies throughout saurian space. Human concepts like crop rotation had been adapted for resource management on mining worlds, while Earth's biodiversity had provided biological solutions to pollution problems that had plagued other civilizations for centuries. "More importantly," Kethvar continued, "you have given the galaxy something it had lost: hope. When civilizations learn about the human farmer who sacrificed everything to protect alien young, they remember why the fight against the devourers matters." Marcus watched Hope Tell playing with Rex in the yard, the young saurian's natural grace blending seamlessly with the old dog's enthusiasm. It still amazed him how easily different species could coexist when fear and mistrust were set aside. "Speaking of which," Kethvar said, "there's something else the council decided. They want to establish a formal position for you." "What kind of position?" Marcus asked warily. Over the months, he'd received numerous offers for important roles in the growing human-alien alliance, but he'd turned them all down. He was a farmer at heart, not a diplomat or administrator. "Ambassador of First Contact," Kethvar said with obvious pride. "Whenever a new species is discovered or makes contact with the galactic community, you would be there to help facilitate peaceful relations. Your experience with cross-species bonding and your natural ability to see common ground make you uniquely qualified." Marcus considered this carefully. "Would I have to leave the farm?" "No. The position would be based here, using your farm as a neutral territory for first meetings. Think of it as extending the hospitality you showed Zeramel to other species in need." The idea had appeal. Marcus had discovered that he enjoyed the challenge of finding ways to bridge the gaps between different forms of life, whether it was modifying his farm equipment to accommodate saurian physiology, or developing new agricultural techniques that worked on alien worlds. He found satisfaction in building connections across species lines. "I'll think about it," Marcus said, which they both knew meant yes. Zeramel emerged from the house carrying a tablet displaying ship schematics. She had become the liaison between human and saurian engineering teams, her experience giving birth on Earth providing unique insights into the needs of different species during long space voyages. She chirped a greeting to Marcus and showed him the latest designs for a new class of exploration vessel. Unlike traditional Saurian ships built for war, these were designed for peaceful contact missions, with living quarters that could be quickly modified for different atmospheric and gravitational needs. The first one will be ready for trials next month. Kethavar translated as Ziramel explained her work. She wants to know if you'd be willing to take a short voyage to test the human-compatible systems. Marcus looked at the sleek ship design and felt a familiar flutter of excitement. After months of learning about the galaxy beyond Earth, the prospect of actually seeing it firsthand was irresistible. "Would the young ones come with us?" he asked. Ziramel chirped emphatically and gestured to her children, who had all stopped what they were doing to look hopefully at Marcus. The bond between the human farmer and the young Saurians had only strengthened over time, creating a family unit that transcended species boundaries. "Try to leave them behind," Kethavar said with amusement. Marcus Tell has already declared his intention to become an explorer like his adopted father. The other two are equally determined to see the stars. As if summoned by the mention of his name, Marcus Tell bounded up the porch steps with the boundless energy of youth. The young Saurian had grown into a beautiful creature, whose silver scales now showed hints of his mother's purple-green coloration. He climbed into Marcus's lap with the same trust he'd shown as a newborn, purring softly as his adopted father stroked his head. "What do you think, little one?" Marcus asked. "Ready for an adventure?" Marcus Tell chirped excitedly and began chattering in the mixture of English and Saurian that the young ones had developed. Kethavar listened with evident pride before translating. "He says the stars are calling, and family should explore them together." Marcus smiled, looking out over his transformed farm toward the sky where alien ships now came and went as regularly as Earth's own aircraft. Sarah would have loved this, he thought. She'd always dreamed of traveling, of seeing new places and meeting new people. In a way, through him and their unlikely alien family, she was. "Then I guess we're going to space," Marcus said, and was rewarded by excited chirping from all three young Saurians. As the sun set over Nebraska, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Marcus reflected on the strange turns his life had taken. A year ago, he'd been a lonely widower tending his crops in quiet isolation. Now he was part of a galactic community, a father to alien children and apparently a symbol of hope for peaceful coexistence among the stars. It had all started with a simple choice: to help someone in need, regardless of who or what they were. That choice had led to friendship, family, and a future among the stars that he could never have imagined. The evening breeze rustled through the corn stalks that grew alongside alien gardens, carrying the mixed scents of earth flowers and otherworldly plants. Somewhere in the distance, a Saurian engineer was explaining gravitational theory to a group of fascinated human scientists, while nearby, human children played with young aliens in games that required no translation. Marcus pulled his alien family closer as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to build bridges between worlds. But tonight, on his front porch in Nebraska, surrounded by the family he'd never expected to have, all was well with the universe. The stars had never looked closer or more welcoming. And somewhere among them, Marcus knew, other lonely farmers on other worlds were looking up at the same sky and dreaming of the day when they too might have unexpected guests who would change their lives forever.